because human genius has now destroyed the impediment of the terrestrial radio.
Boston Herald Radio.
Boston Herald Radio.
This is Boston Herald Radio. It's The Money Show with Rick Schaefer and Susan Kaplan.
Welcome back. Hour number 2 of today's version of the Best Money Show on radio. As promised, Rich Rosser, who is one of the founders of and a working member of Buyers Brokers Only LLC, has joined us and has been nice enough to come in studio. Rich, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
In the interest of full disclosure, I should mention, and if you've been listening to the Money Show, you know this already, that Buyers Brokers Only LLC is an advertiser on Boston Herald Radio and on the Money Show, and we are very, very happy to have them as such. You're actually our lead advertiser, which we really appreciate. And because I've been in real estate for so long, it especially pleases me. First question, and we'll get into this in much more depth later, but before we get into the specifics about Buyers Brokers Only, just quickly give us an overview of your career and how you came to start Buyers Brokers LLC.
Sure. Well, Buyers Brokers Only LLC was started in November of 2005. Mm-hmm. I started it with a business partner, Dave Kress.
Yeah.
A little bit about my background. I graduated from Northeastern University's School of Journalism in 1991. Mm-hmm. I went on to law school at New England School of Law. I graduated from there in 1995.
Yeah.
I practiced law for about 10 years. I still do very little law at this point, but I practiced law for about 10 years, mostly trial work.
Okay. You weren't in the real estate field at all?
A little bit. I did a little bit of real estate law, but it wasn't my primary focus. Was trial work. And then, like I said, started Buyers Brokers Only about 10 years ago, and that's my full-time work now.
And what gave you the idea to start the firm?
It's sort of an interesting story. Dave Kress, my business partner, was my law clerk when he was in law school. Mm-hmm. And when he got out of law school, I suggested to him that he might want to get his broker's license, that he was at that age where a lot of his friends might be thinking about buying a house, mm-hmm. and he would be able to help them. He did that. It went well, and we started talking about starting a company where we just represented buyers. We felt that buyers didn't really necessarily get a fair shake. Yeah, real estate is sort of geared towards sellers, and everybody wants to represent the seller. And so, in terms of real estate agents anyway. And so that's sort of why we focus in that direction. Exclusive buyer agency isn't something we invented. It's been around for probably 20, 25 years. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, I'm not sure we knew exactly what exclusive buyer agency was when we started the company. But our thought process is that we wanted to level the playing field for buyers.
Explain what. I still think, as you say, when people think of a real estate broker, they usually think of a seller's broker. As I've told you, I used to not. I was sort of skeptical about buyers brokers, but the not your company, but just the buyers brokers in general. But it has sort of evolved to the point where I think as long as you get a good one, and it's the same, if you're going to sell your home, you want to get a good broker. I think it's very important for buyers to do that. And as you pointed out, buyers oftentimes don't get the type of direction that they need. But explain what a buyer's broker, especially an exclusive buyer's broker, like one we get if they went to Buyers Brokers Only, what that buyer's broker will do for you.
Sure. Well, I think whether you're selling a house or buying a house, it really comes down to who's got your best interest in mind, where do their loyalties lie, and who's going to have your back. And so in Massachusetts, buyer agency is not uncommon. A lot of people use a buyer agent mm-hmm. to buy a house. But there's two kinds of buyer agents. There's what's called a designated buyer agent, and then there's an exclusive buyer agent. A designated buyer agent is someone who will represent you. They'll have a fiduciary responsibility to the buyer, but they work for a traditional real estate firm that also sells real estate, or I should say, represents sellers.
Yeah.
And they may also represent sellers also. So the difficulty that could arise in that situation is that the buyer agent that you're using may have property for sale. Other agents in his or her office may have property for sale. And if you're interested in those properties, that's where the conflict of interest arises.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a property that they're listing, they become a dual agent. If it's a property someone else in the office is listing, you have that sort of conflict where you have an agent representing you, but everyone else in the company represents the seller. With an exclusive buyer agent, those conflicts don't arise because they work at a firm where they're only representing buyers. So they're not selling property for sale. No one in their office is putting up property for sale. And so those conflicts don't arise.
And my experience has always been, even when you have honest people, and there's some people who are less than honest, but even when you have very honest people who are trying to avoid any conflict, there can be sort of an underlying, if you're in a situation like that, where you're sort of put in the middle, so to speak, then there is it can skew how things are done, even if you're trying very hard not to do it. But if, as you said, if you're in a situation where there is no conflict, where you are exclusively, and it can be in real estate or in law or any situation, if you're exclusively representing one person, especially in something like real estate, where the buyer and the seller really do have their interests aren't the same. For example, a lot of closing attorneys will represent both the buyer and the bank, but their interests are pretty much the same. You can't say that about most buyers and sellers.
Oh, no.
Their interests are usually 180 degrees, and you really do need somebody to have your back, as you say. I've always told people buyers to have a very good real estate attorney, but a good real estate attorney isn't going to have the time to do some of the things that a buyer's agent can do for you.
Well, and also, as you know, a real estate attorney, for the most part, is getting involved at the time of the purchase and sale agreement.
Right.
There's a lot that goes on before that.
Yes.
Looking at the houses, evaluating the houses,
Yep.
Making recommendations for mortgage brokers or loan officers, making recommendations for home inspectors, things like that. So there's a lot of advice that goes into helping a buyer long before they get to the point of purchase and sale.
I have always told people that one of the most important things that a seller's agent can do for a seller is to price the property correctly. I would think that would transfer over to a buyer's agent in doing the same type of work, looking at comps and telling the prospective buyer what a property is worth, and therefore what area of offer they should make, so that they're not overpaying far more than the property's worth, but by the same token are not giving a offer that's so low that the seller is just not even going to consider it.
Yeah, that's a big part of what we do, is to research sold properties, comparable sales, comps, as you call them.
Yeah.
That's the sort of industry lingo. Mm-hmm. And there's no one right way to do that. The way I do it is I like to look at properties that have sold in that price range, then look at properties that in that town or that neighborhood, and then properties that have sold that have the same number of bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, things like that.
Yeah.
And then also just sort of look at trends in that community. Are the prices rising? Are they going down? What's the average? One piece of information that I could get for clients is to tell them what is the list price to sale price ratio. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, in most communities in the greater Boston area, it's probably 98% or higher.
Okay.
For list price to sale price.
We're talking with Rich Rosa, who is a founder and a member of Buyers Brokers Only LLC. We do have to take a break. We'll come back. We've got lots more information for you, so don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Best Money Show on radio, on Boston Herald Radio.
Boston Herald Radio News will take you up to Lansdowne, out to Upton, and back to the waterfront. Now, The Money Show with Rick Schaefer and Susan Kaplan.
Welcome back. Our guest this hour is Rich Rosa, who is the founder, one of the founders of, and a member of Buyers Brokers Only LLC. One of the questions that people have about buyers brokers, because it sort of evolved. It used to be some buyers brokers would charge you a fee, and some sellers brokers didn't want to use buyers broker or didn't want to deal with a buyer who had buyers brokers. This is years ago. It's pretty much become totally accepted, certainly in Massachusetts. But how do buyers brokers get paid?
Sure. Well, when someone wants to sell their house, they're going to hire a listing agent.
Right.
And that listing agent in Massachusetts, for the most part, is going to get 4 or 5% to sell that house.
Yeah.
Occasionally they'll get 6. Sometimes it'll be less than 4. But for the most part, it's 4 or 5%.
Right.
That agent then puts the house on the multiple listing service, the MLS, and offers what's called a cooperating commission.
Yeah.
Most times it's half of what they're getting, so it would be either 2% or 2.5% to the buyer agent who brings the buyer, so to speak. But it doesn't have to be half. So the way I get paid is when I help someone purchase a home, I'm getting half of that commission or some portion of that commission that the seller is paying to the listing agent to sell their home.
So the bottom line is, by using a buyer's agent, you're not, people who worry that it's going to push up the price, they need not worry about that.
It's not. I mean, not every agent buyer agent works the same way. Mm-hmm. There are some that require a minimum percentage, so if the cooperating commission is less than that, they would charge the buyers the difference. Mm-hmm. I have heard of some requiring a retainer up front, so if the buyer doesn't buy a house, they still get some sort of money, then they would return the retainer if they bought a house. We don't do any of that. Yeah. We take whatever's offered by the listing brokerage. So no, it doesn't cost the buyer any money. It's not going to jack up the price. And it's a myth to think that if you go on your own, that somehow the listing agent is going to give you a better deal, because they're not. No. They want to collect the whole commission themselves if there's no buyer agent. So basically, you're getting no representation, and the listing agent's making more money to help the seller.
It works both ways. People think that if they don't use a buyer's agent, or if they're selling a home, they don't use a seller's agent, that by avoiding the commission, they're going to make more money. And there's a couple of studies out which show that with the exception of, if you sell it between, like to your relative, which isn't really an arm's length deal, sellers make more money and buyers get better deals when they have an agent than when they don't have an agent, even when you factor in the brokerage fee.
And I'll tell you what I see a lot of times with the for sale by owners is they're not necessarily selling their house on their own because they're trying to save the commission.
Yeah.
They're selling the house on their own because they've called up 2 or 3 agents.
Yeah.
They've all told them the house is worth around $400, and they want to list it for $450, so they just go and do it on their own. So what I typically find is a lot of the for sale by owner houses are overpriced.
Yes, and the other thing is people have become more savvy to this. So the potential buyer comes in, sees there's no broker, and they figure, well, I'll offer a lower price, and they'll make the argument, you're not paying a commission. So it really does screw everything up. You're really much better off using a broker. Let's switch gears for a second. All through the winter, I've been telling people it's a great time to sell your home because they're, at least in the greater Boston real estate market, there's been a gross undersupply of properties. We've gotten, and add to that the terrible winter, people either didn't want to or couldn't get out of their homes. So obviously it probably wasn't the best winter on record for home sales. We're into the spring selling season, and the weather has obviously changed. What have you seen relative to the real estate market? It always ticks up in the springtime, but what are you seeing happening?
Well, the real estate market in terms of inventory is very tight, and it has been for 18 months, 2 years really. What we are seeing is there are more properties coming on the market.
Yeah.
However, there are also a lot of buyers that have sort of been, waiting for that to happen. So there is a lot of competition for houses that are in good locations and are priced well.
So the supply has gone up as we thought it would, but the demand has gone up because the people who were waiting are coming back in. Plus the people who had looked during the winter but couldn't find anything are continuing to look. So there's just as much competition.
Pretty much, yes, I would say so. I think that the competition has maybe eased a little bit once you get outside of Route 128. Because even a year ago, I had buyers looking as far away as Tingsboro, which is almost an hour from Boston, and they were outbid a couple of times before they found a house. I think that has tailed off a little bit on the when you get 45 minutes or farther from Boston, but certainly inside Route 128, the competition is fierce.
But it still back to what we were talking about before, it behooves the seller to price a property right, but it also behooves the buyer to know what a fair price for a particular property is.
Sure, and I could talk about both those things. One thing is from the seller's perspective, what I see is if they don't price the house right, if they really overprice it, and it doesn't sell right away, buyers start asking the question, well, what's going on? Why, because everything else is selling in a week. Why hasn't this house sold in 3 weeks or a month? And that really ends up hurting the seller. From the buyer's perspective, why it's so important to make sure you have an agent who's telling you what these properties are worth is because, people get very emotional about this, and they really like the house, and they know there's 2 or 3 other offers, and next thing you know, people are either offering full price or over asking price. And quite frankly, sometimes the houses just aren't worth what they're being listed for. So everyone assumes, you got to offer full price because that's the market. But if the house wasn't priced right to begin with, you're overpaying.
You've just touched on another reason to have a buyer's broker. I've always told people to get a good real estate attorney, because the real estate attorney will keep their client, both the buyer and or seller, from getting their emotions involved. And when it comes to residential property, emotions always get involved. And when emotions get involved, people make mistakes. I'm sure that you do that as well. And as you mentioned, you're doing it before the real estate attorney would really get involved, and keeping people from getting their emotions involved and making stupid mistakes, basically.
Yeah, I tell clients all the time, it's a business transaction.
Right.
You want the best price, the seller wants the highest price. What's important is you do your homework beforehand so that you can make a good offer, be prepared to negotiate if that's the case, and go from there, and not let emotion get in the way of you getting what you need.
Actually, we already talked about that. Let's talk about buyers brokers specifically. When was it? You said it was established in 2005.
November 2005. Yes.
So you actually grew up, or the company grew up, during one of the toughest real estate markets. Certainly, once we got to 2008, that we've ever seen. So that's a kudos to you and the company to have grown and flourished over the last 7-8 years, because I don't think we've seen an easy real estate market since 2008.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it has been. There's 2009, 2010, 2011 were challenging.
How many buyers brokers does Buyers Brokers LLC employ, and what geographic areas does the company as a whole cover? Sure.
Dave and I probably started adding brokers about 6 or 7 years ago. And now we have about 25 brokers. And we cover greater Boston up to southern New Hampshire, down to Plymouth County, right to the Rhode Island border, and out to Central Mass.
Okay, so you cover you really cover the entire greater Boston real estate market. One of the things about buyers brokers that I like a lot is that all of the buyer brokers at Buyers Brokers Only LLC are attorneys. What made you decide to go that route, and tell us what the benefits of having a buyer broker also as an attorney is to your clients? Sure. Well, Dave and I are both attorneys, and as part of what we wanted to do when we established the company was, like I said, have someone in the corner for the buyers, and to really try to
provide a really professional service to home buyers. And so we decided that when we were growing that we were going to just add attorneys like ourselves. Now we're not a real estate firm. We don't give legal advice to our home buyer clients. But what I tell people is, we have a level of knowledge that we've learned either through law school or through working as real estate attorneys, and we don't forget that just because we're not acting as their attorney. And so if things come up that we think that they need to talk to their real estate attorney about, then we certainly say, hey, you'll want to talk about this issue with the attorney. I also think it gives us the ability to have a really good relationship with the real estate attorneys. And when it comes time to explain some of the things that we negotiated or that we want to make sure are in the purchase and sale agreement going forward.
And I've been not a buyer's broker, but I've worked as a mortgage broker. I've worked as a real estate agent, usually on the seller side, and I've also been a real estate attorney. And I have seen it covers the whole gamut of level of knowledge amongst brokers, how much they know and how much they don't know, even putting an offer together. So having someone with who's a lawyer who has the legal savvy, because a lot of times when a buyer's putting an offer in, you're oftentimes, especially in this market, in competition, and unfortunately a lot of buyers don't have an attorney until the last minute. So having someone who has some of that acumen as their broker can help them put the right language into an offer sheet, which is very important.
And I think a lot of listing agents also appreciated that, we're the type of people that, dot the I's and cross the T's, so to speak, and we've got everything in order when we make the offer, and it makes their life easier too, which helps our clients if we're presenting an offer that's complete. It has everything it needs to have in it, and there's no question marks, especially if it's a multiple offer situation and they're bringing all these offers to a seller. I think it helps when everything is done the proper way and everything is taken care of.
We have to take a break, but before we leave this part of what we're talking about, I just wanted you to comment on the fact that you urge people to get a real estate attorney to the point where I'm sure you refer people to them, but in addition, you give a portion, a refund.
We give a small commission rebate after closing based on the price of the house. And what we do is we tell clients that we're giving them that money so that it could offset the cost of their real estate attorney. We think it's so important that everyone get a real estate attorney. And I'm not sure how much time we have, but we could talk a little bit more about why that's so important.
Definitely. I talk about it all the time. I like to always want to get another take on it. Our guest this afternoon is Rich Rosa, who is founder and one of the members of Buyers Brokers Only LLC. We'll take a break. We'll come back with more right here on the Best Money Show on radio, on Boston Herald Radio.
Because human genius has now destroyed the impediment of the terrestrial radio.
Boston Herald Radio.
Boston Herald Radio.
Now, The Money Show with Rick Schaefer and Susan Kaplan.
Welcome back. Our guest this hour is Rich Rosa, who is founder of, or one of the founders of, and also a broker at Buyers Brokers Only LLC, which is a company which exclusively represents buyers as a buyer's agent when people are looking to buy a piece of property. And I've mentioned this many times. I was a skeptic for years, and then I sort of came around to it. And I don't say this, just because you're an advertiser here. I've been very impressed by the things that you do. And
thank you.
And basically, as you say, you have buyers back. And that's what, I've always told people that's what they need. And you as you pointed out, you are in the fray before they get to a real estate attorney. And, I have always told people you got to get a good real estate attorney. But the real estate attorney is not going to help you go look for the property. It's just too early in the procedure. In fact, a lot of times people will come to me as a real estate attorney, and I will give them advice on getting an inspector and getting a mortgage broker. But by that point, sometimes it's too late because they've already started. They've already got made some of their relationships. Talk about how you can help people find the type of mortgage they're looking for, and also talk about the extreme need for buyers to have a pre-approval letter before going to look for a property these days.
Well, there's a lot of mortgage programs, and when I meet with clients and I have an initial consultation with them, I spend a lot of time talking about financing and mortgage programs. And the reason is because there are many different programs, but not every lender does every type of program. So it's good to have a discussion with a buyer about their particular situation, so you could explain to them, well, this program might work for you or that program might work for you, and then have them speak with a lender that actually does one of those programs. Not every program is a good fit for every buyer, and there's different ways to structure loans that are beneficial to some buyers and not to others. Some people have a really good salary, but they haven't saved a lot of money. Some people maybe have a lot of money saved, but they don't have a really big salary. And those two people right there probably would benefit from a different type of loan. When
we were talking off air, you were talking about Mass Housing, which I've always been a big fan of. Tom Gleason, who's the head of Mass Housing, has been a frequent guest here on the Money Show. Explain, how that is extremely beneficial program for many first-time home buyers.
Mass Housing is a great program. There's some misconceptions. I think one misconception is people think it's only for low income. In fact, I believe the income cap right now is up to about $123,000, and that's for the borrower. One thing to be aware of is some homebuyer programs have an income cap that is household. Mass Housing doesn't look at your household; they look at the borrower. So in some situations, maybe one spouse is making 110 and the other spouse is making 30, let's say. Together they wouldn't qualify, but the 110 spouse could apply for the mortgage, him or herself, with Mass Housing and get that loan. And they have quite a few different programs that are very helpful. They have a no MI program, which is a no mortgage insurance program. It's a slightly higher interest rate, but you don't pay mortgage insurance. Mortgage insurance is something that buyers have to pay if they're putting down less than 20% when they purchase a home. The higher interest rate, maybe it results in their monthly mortgage payment being $50, $75, or $100 more a month. However, eliminating the PMI, it's also called private mortgage insurance, PMI, could save them $250, $300 a month. So there's a net benefit by doing it that way. And this is where it's really important to have a savvy mortgage professional helping you, because a good one will tell you where the break-even point is. Because there's always a point where you'd be better off paying the PMI or not paying the PMI. Usually it's somewhere around 8 to 10 years. So if you think you're going to be in a house, say, less than 9 years, you're probably better off with the no MI program. If you're pretty confident that you're going to be there 15 or 20 years, you're probably better off with the lower interest rate and paying the PMI. And these are the things that buyers need to be aware of.
And one of the things I found is some mortgage, you talk to a mortgage broker about it, and some of them aren't really savvy to this, or if they are, they really can't run the numbers well, whereas I'm sure you can sit down and show people, basically it's a relatively simple formula, but if somebody sees somebody running the numbers and say, this is how we get to the break-even point, they can understand that.
Sure. I mean, that's typically something the mortgage professional would do for them, and some of the good ones even have software programs where they just plug in numbers and it shoots out a spreadsheet that shows you where that break-even point is. Also, though, with Mass Housing, if you do pay mortgage insurance, they have something called an MI Plus program where if you lose your job while you have a Mass Housing mortgage, they'll pay your mortgage for up to 6 months, which is a great benefit. It doesn't cost anything extra.
Mass Housing has come up with just a whole bunch of programs, which I love, and I don't understand why more lenders aren't doing it. But unfortunately, a lot of lenders are, their hands are tied by the secondary mortgage market, and sometimes it's just they don't think outside the box. And
homebuyers should be aware too that they could put down as little as 3% with a Mass Housing mortgage, 5% if it's a multifamily.
Talk about FHA loans, because a lot of people want to qualify, think that FHA loans are the way to go. What's your opinion of FHA loans?
FHA loans should be their last option.
Why do you think that?
Because they're very expensive.
Okay.
If it's the only loan that you qualify for, then it's the only loan that you qualify for, and that's okay. But and again, this is another reason why I like to talk to people about their circumstances, because sometimes they'll go to a mortgage broker, and that person will say, "Oh yeah, you could do FHA, and you'll be all set." Here's the problem with FHA. First, there's what they call upfront PMI or upfront MI. Mm-hmm. Besides paying the monthly mortgage insurance payment, they have an upfront payment, which is 1.75% of the loan. So if you have a $300,000 loan, you're paying over $5,000 in extra costs right up front at closing. Now they'll roll it into the loan, so you won't have to come up with the cash, but it's still an added cost. And I try to explain to people, it's not just what you're paying every month, but what's your total cost of borrowing. So that's one part of FHA that makes it very expensive. As of June, I believe June 2012, or maybe I think it's June 2012, PMI does not go away when you reach 20% equity in your home.
So you're basically stuck with it.
Stuck with it forever. Now, here's what a lot of mortgage people will say to home buyers. Well, don't worry about it, because you'll just refinance out of the FHA loan in a few years, and you won't have to worry about the PMI. But here's the problem. Rates are at 3.5%, 3 3/4. 3 years from now, when you try to get out of the FHA loan, they might be at 5 or 5.5%, so you didn't have any net savings.
Or you just may not qualify. That was one of the problems that brokers were telling people, which was part of the problem of why we got into the recession and why the bubble burst in the real estate market to begin with. Give us a few. We have to take a break, but give us a few mortgage mistakes that people should avoid, or people tend to make and hopefully avoid.
Well, I think a lot of people ask me about shopping around, and I think shopping around is not a bad idea. But what you have to understand is mortgage rates change every day. Mm-hmm. So what I always tell people, if you're going to shop around, don't call somebody on Monday, somebody else on Tuesday, somebody else on Wednesday, because you're very likely to get 3 different rates. Yeah. What you ought to do is you ought to call everybody on Monday or everybody on Tuesday, and that will give you a more accurate picture of what their rates are. And then also you have to compare not just rates but closing costs as well.
Exactly. And a lot of people aren't. Generally, I tell people, and a lot of people don't do it, but I tell you, if you get good rate and term, and you like the mortgage broker, then lock it in, or at least don't say I'm going to go with you.
Well, that's the other thing too. When they go for a pre-approval or a pre-qualification, they ask about rates, but what I explain to people is they're only going to lock you in for maybe 30, 45 days.
Right.
So if you're at the beginning of the process, I tell people not to get too worried about what interest rate you're being told now, because 2 months from now or 3 months from now or 4 months from now, when you find the house that you're going to purchase, the rates are going to probably have changed anyway.
We're talking with Rich Rosa, who is one of the founders of and a member of Buyers Brokers Only LLC, which is a buyers brokers agency which exclusively represents people who are going to buy a home. We'll take a break. We'll come back and finish up our interview with Rich Rosa right here on the Best Money Show on radio, on Boston Herald Radio.
Boston Herald, BostonHerald.com, Boston Herald Radio. Now, The Money Show with Rick Schaefer and Susan Kaplan.
Welcome back. Our guest this afternoon is Rich Rosa, who is a founder of and a member of Buyers Brokers Only LLC. We're going to go back to our interview in a second, but let me remind you, as always, that the wise consumer is the informed consumer. So before buying, selling, renting, refinancing, or signing any real estate-related agreement, or before making any major money decision whatsoever, it's always best to speak with and take the advice of a qualified attorney, accountant, and/or if you can find a good one or a great one, such as my co-host Susan Kaplan, a financial planner. Let me also remind you that if you're not yet a follower of Susan's and mine on Twitter, you really should be. My Twitter address is at @RSchaefer, SHAFFER1, and Susan's is at @SKaplan 111, so it's at @RSchaefer1 and at @SKaplan, KAPLAN 111. Since we're pushed for time, I won't tell you why. Just you'll have to trust me on that. Rich, people who are looking to purchase a new construction, which is one of my not pet peeves, but I can't stress how careful people have to be. Talk about that in general, the pricing, and also the need for inspection, which a lot of people think you don't need with new construction, but you really do.
Well, the first thing people should know about new construction is there's not a lot of it in Massachusetts because there's not a lot of land.
Right.
So they should be prepared to pay a premium for it. The other thing that's important to know about new construction is how to negotiate it. Typically, a builder, if they're building, let's say, a subdivision of 12 houses, and let's say you're one of the first, 6, 8, 10 houses that is being bought, they're not going to want to negotiate too much on price, because once they drop the price for one person, that becomes the ceiling for the next person. So what you really want to try to do is negotiate on upgrades, because no one's going to know that the builder gave you hardwood flooring on the second floor, or granite or extra special granite countertops, or a higher allowance for appliances or for lighting. So those are the things that you're more likely to be able to negotiate. The other thing that's important to know is what the builder planned to do before you start to negotiate. And what I'm talking about is, for instance, what exactly were the finishes going to be? What kind of heating system was he going to put in? What kind of cabinets, countertops? What was the allowance for lighting and appliances? Because if you don't know those things, and then you go in and say, well, I'd like, hardwood on the second floor, and I'd like, a larger deck and things like that, the builder may say, sure, and you think you're getting a deal, but you never asked what he was going to do. So now the high-end Burnham or Will McLean heating system just became a lesser known brand. And maybe the granite countertops that were going to be, he was going to pay $60 a linear square foot for, is now going to be $40. So it's important to know what the builder was going to do prior to you starting to negotiate.
I've got 2 more questions for you. We got about a minute for each question.
Okay.
First one is, why should homebuyers start their home search going to open houses, and why should they not do it on their own but bring their buyer's agent with them?
Well, I mean, you have to remember that the agents at the open house represent the seller. Their obligation is to do what's best for the seller, to make the most money for the seller. And what happens often is buyers will show up at open houses and they say, well, I'm just browsing, I'm not really serious. But then they find something they like and they start telling the listing agent or any agent at that open house things that they probably shouldn't be telling them about themselves. And that could hurt them when they come time to negotiate.
I've been in situations where I have found out from my broker that this person is really hot to trot, to buy the property, and knowing that, and it's not illegal that they know it. It's they spilled the beans, so to speak. I've been taking a harder line on what my bottom line would be had I not known that. So it's very important that people know that. Another question I wanted to ask you is, actually we'll have to end up with this question, but in 200 words or less, why should somebody, if they're going to get a buyer's broker, and I think I hope we've convinced people that if they're going to buy a home, they should get a buyer's broker. Why should they go to Buyers Brokers Only LLC?
Well, I think, like you've said many times in this show, people should do some research, and I also think people should talk to more than one broker and see who's a good fit. And I hope that people will consider Buyers Brokers Only. We only represent buyers. We're 100% loyal to buyers. Every one of us at the company is a lawyer. We take a lot of pride in our professionalism and the fact that we really have the backs of the buyers. And that's why I think they should consider giving us a call.
Towards that end, actually, one more question. How do people get in touch with you, both either by phone or over the internet?
Sure. They could reach us online at buyersbrokersonly.com. That's buyersbrokersonly.com. They could call 978-835-5906. That's the main number. But if they go to the website, they could find a list of all of our brokers and where they work from. And they could also find us on Facebook.
And just give us the phone number one more time.
978-835-5906. 5906.
Rich, always a pleasure as always. I will, tell people that if you're going to buy a home, I think you should get a buyer's broker, and I think you definitely should consider highly a Buyers Brokers Only LLC, because I've been very, very impressed. The more I talk to you and see how your business runs, the more impressed I am. So
thank you.
Good luck, and we'll talk to you again. Also, I forgot to thank our producer, Christian Burgoyne. Did a great job as always. I'm Rick Schaefer. I'll be back tomorrow at 4 with another edition of the Best Money Show on radio right here on Boston Herald Radio. The Money Show is sponsored in part by Buyers Brokers Only LLC and Dream Smile Dental.
Because human genius has now destroyed the impediment of the terrestrial radio.
Boston Herald Radio.